Can you really fire a volunteer at church? Let's get into that now on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu. A.J., today we're talking about a difficult topic, and that is firing volunteers. I think some people might even react to that and go, they're volunteers. You can't fire them. They're helping you out. They're pitching in. You can't let them go. And the reality is that, in fact, you can. You can fire a volunteer, and sometimes you should. And we will eventually get to the how on doing this. But before we do, we're going to also explore why you might need to and how you can prevent the problem in the first place. But then I promise we will eventually get to how to do it if you actually need to do that. But before we dive into all of that, I want to mention the Healthy Churches Toolkit. Go to healthychurchestoolkit.com. Sign up free for 7 days. There's all kinds of things in there to help you manage your volunteer teams and get people aligned and in the right spot. Because spoiler alert, that's one of the reasons why we have to let people go, is because maybe they're not in the right place in the first place. And you can prevent that by getting them connected to something that aligns with their divine design. We went through this in our most recent workshop in the toolkit. We've created a divine design tool that helps people understand how they are wired and gives them suggestions on positions that might align well with their gifting. And you can play around with that and check it out at healthychurchestoolkit.com free for 7 days.
Yeah, do that. So we're taking this up a notch, Scott, because we've talked before about evaluating volunteers, and that already gets people like, oh, I know, that sounds like a bad idea. And now we're taking that to the next level and actually talking about removing a volunteer from a serving position. So, and I know people aren't saying, no, there's 100% of the time never a way or a case for this. Everybody probably agrees, yes, there are like these extreme situations in which we would do that. Right. And we'll talk about that here in just here in a second, as we kind of set up our first part of today's episode on why you might need to let a volunteer go. So yeah, I think we all agree on the extreme situations. So let's kind of dive into these, Scott. First of all, ethical violations. Yeah, I think nobody's going to push back on that. Maybe one or two of you, probably not. But yeah, if we're dealing with areas in which breaches of trust have become a problem, confidentiality, moral failures, unfortunately, happen too often in the church. Some of these, end up making news headlines. But
yeah. Well, and also in this category, I think, although I don't know, I want to be sensitive to the fact that there can be situations. But if someone's in the middle of going through a divorce, even if it's not their fault, like their spouse cheated on them or something like that, so, probably serving is not the thing they need to be doing right now. Not even because they're the one at fault, but because if there's a chance for them to salvage their marriage, or that might be a better use of their time than having them up singing on stage. So that's somewhat not, I wouldn't even call that firing as much as just giving space for a pause and saying, hey, I wouldn't even call that a firing. But sometimes approaching someone and going, hey, I don't want you to feel the pressure. You're going through this traumatic event. Do not feel the pressure to be volunteering right now when you need to navigate this difficult life situation. So I wouldn't even put that in the category of firing. But sometimes, you'd be surprised. There are some churches that just plow on through, letting people continue to volunteer, even though someone's going through the most traumatic experience of their life. Now, if it is their fault, they're the one who did something, then that maybe falls into the firing category.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is something to keep in mind. That kind of falls under just having good relationships in the volunteer environment, and providing a level of care that the Bible would suggest we do. So, I mean, yeah, that's good fellowship. That's good relationships. But yeah, okay, all right. So, but anyway, that's our first one. Ethical violations certainly is cause for firing in many circumstances.
Yes.
And, we've also talked before, and we've seen examples of how poorly church leadership teams sometimes handle these things. And, sometimes benefit of the doubt, attempting maybe a next level of grace that maybe is too much. Instead of being honest and transparent and taking care of things before they get out of hand. So, yeah, this is an area that churches need to take extremely seriously and do things in the right time frame before they get too bad.
Yeah, well, on that note, someone might say, well, this person repented.
Mm-hmm.
Well, part of repentance might be voluntarily stepping down from a particular leadership role. That might not mean removal from the church entirely. It hopefully doesn't. But part of repentance might be going, I need to take a season away from visible, public-facing, even volunteer ministry, because I recognize that I need to clearly focus on, my walk with the Lord. And do you know what I'm saying? So sometimes we go, well, they repented, that's why we didn't remove them. But they should have enough self-awareness to go, I probably shouldn't be serving right now. I probably need to It depends on what the situation is.
Yeah. I'm
trying to speak categorically.
I'll take it too sidetracked on this, but repentance would begin perhaps with a, verbalizing that, I repent.
It can't just be, I'm saying sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's to see true repentance takes time. We need to see that the behavior actually has changed over a period of time.
Right. So what's not continue to platform you?
Yes.
Like, let's give you an opportunity to show that there's been repentance, and then we can resume. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't just yell, I declare bankruptcy, and have that
right.
true.
That's right.
So,
yeah. And it's hard to talk about these things because we're speaking generically, and you need to deal with people individually. But
well, I recently talked about the situation that we had at a church that my young son went to a VBS at, in which when I went to pick him up, the volunteer that was bringing kids out for pickup was wearing an ankle monitor, like a police courts system ankle monitor. And I'm like, wow.
Did we talk about this? I missed this conversation.
Did I bring this up last week in some instance? Because I know I just had this conversation with somebody.
I don't think it was with me.
I don't remember. But yes. So, best case scenario, that's just horrible optics for the church. That just looks really bad.
Totally.
But, there was a legal situation that had happened. And the police wanted to keep an eye, or the court system wanted to keep an eye on where this person was. And them, bringing my 4-year-old out from VBS probably wasn't the best choice for the church to make. The pastor didn't share my concern. And that, led to us not participating in their program anymore. But, so this is a situation in which, at least for a time, perhaps this volunteer, I don't have any idea what their crime was, but it was significant enough where they're like,
until proven guilty. Maybe they hadn't committed any crime, but maybe don't have them. Yeah. They can sit in the back and hit, if they want to really volunteer, maybe change the slides.
Yeah.
When you're sitting in the back and no one can see your ankle monitor.
So that was a bad, that was a bad choice. And this is the kind of thing we're talking about.
Exactly. But we can also be talking about toxic behavior. And this is something that churches don't deal with. They leave unaddressed. Someone who is gossiping, or driving divisive attitudes. I heard a very troubling story recently in a church where one of the volunteers, who is a greeter, was having an interaction. And I know that the people from this church listen to the podcast, so I won't out you. I promise, guys. But one of the volunteers was a greeter got mad at another volunteer for moving some chairs, and in the ensuing sort of debate that happened between them, the one volunteer spat on the other volunteer, and like that can't happen.
Yeah.
No. And so those kinds of things you'd say, no, I'm sorry. Like this kind of behavior is not acceptable. And you're in timeout, so to speak.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't even matter if the other person was wrong. That's irrelevant. We don't spit on people in a disagreement, right? Like the rightness or wrongness of the moving of the chairs doesn't matter. When you argue with someone or debate with someone or you have a disagreement with someone, we don't spit on people.
Yeah. Yep. I had a situation once where I'm trying to remember if this person was actually a volunteer. Not sure they were formally a volunteer. It was just a person in the church that was really into greeting people, but had
I remember the story.
had some creepy behavior. Parents weren't excited. You probably it wasn't even your story, Scott. You might remember better than me. But I think it was a little too huggy with kids.
No. What it was is he had candy in his pocket, and every week he would come up and hug kids and ask them if they wanted candy. And it was, so far as anyone could tell, totally innocent behavior.
Yeah. Yes.
But had
not everybody, not all parents would be excited about that.
No, most people are not like, go get candy and a hug from the candy and hug guy. Like, it's just not something you can do in this day and age.
Yeah, which is I don't think he was a formal greet. I don't think he was formally.
I know. I think my recollection because again, this is your story and not mine.
Yeah.
What I seem to recall you saying is that they were having problems because he had been a formal volunteer. They'd asked him to quit doing that. He refused, so they removed him as a formal volunteer, but then he just kept doing it on his own. And they were like, well, how do we handle this? Because he's not even really a greeter anymore. He's just a guy standing out in our lobby handing out hugs and candy to kids.
Yeah. It was like, I just saw that Seinfeld clip last night when Kramer just starts volunteering. Basically, he shows up in an office and he's just working there. And then the boss calls him in to fire him. He's like, I'm going to have to let you go. I mean, your work is terrible. It's like you don't even have any training. And he's like, I don't even work here. He's like, that's what makes this so hard.
Yeah. Which maybe leads to the next reason why you might let someone go, which is chronic unreliability or unwillingness to follow leadership. You give them instructions and they don't do what they're supposed to do. They don't show up on time. They just don't show up at all. They're totally disrespecting other people's time, and that would be a legitimate reason to say, I just don't think that, well, at least at minimum, you have to deal with it. You have to go, how are we going to handle this situation? Which we'll talk about here in a second. And then last one real quick, because we've spent too long on this part, is just a mismatch of gifts. Sometimes you put someone in a role and you think it's going to be a fit. You may even have done some divine design discovery with them or something. Or they might have thought that they had a passion for something. And then you get them into that role and you go, like, this is not a fit. I had this happen. I learned very quickly. I was not big on doing auditions for worship ministry, like formal ones, because I thought that it was, I don't know. I was young when I was starting that, and I thought, that's a lot of pressure, and that seems kind of weird. But then I had one or two people get on the team who weren't terrible, but they weren't very good. And And so I regretted that. So I pretty quickly instituted a very informal auditioning system where someone would come in and I would play my guitar and sing, and they would sing along with me. Or if they were playing an instrument, they would play along with me. So it was less me sitting up there like Simon Cowell judging them on American Idol, and more like, hey, let's play a song together just so I can see you play. So it was less scary, but because someone might not do well in that environment when they feel like they have to perform for one person. But I still got to hear them. But sometimes you go, oh, this is not a very good fit. And it's harder to get rid of that person when you've put them on the team and then you find out that they're not a very good singer. You know, you're like, oh, I already told them they could sing. So then you're telling the sound guy, like, turn their mic way down, turn them way up in their own monitor so they can hear themselves, but turn them, those are not great situations. So, but if you find someone who's not very good at their job, that might be reason enough to move them somewhere else.
Yeah. So not all of this is really, this piece isn't like you're fired. You can't do anything here. Some of this is just like they're not in the right place. They need to be moved. But something just occurred to me. I think it'd be pretty cool. Smaller churches sometimes struggle with, I want to say, quality music. The pool of volunteers is smaller. And so the music sometimes isn't as amazing as you would like it to be. But, a couple $100 in the budget, we could provide some lessons, instrument lessons, even vocal lessons for people. Not anything I've ever heard of a church doing, but I mean, if you've got somebody that with an interest, a desire, maybe at least a hint of talent, that might be a good investment,
if you've got a few decent players, I am a big advocate of the shadowing. Like let the less developed players and singers come to practices, which goes to practices. Like I'm shocked at the number of churches that the only rehearsal they have is basically a sound check before Sunday worship, which is no time to develop a volunteer.
Yeah.
Run a rehearsal during the week. Let those people who are newer or less experienced come and play with you during the rehearsal. And you'd be surprised at how quickly they catch up. I think that when you have people who are younger in particular, they maybe learn a certain style, they listen to the radio, or they have a particular style of music, and playing worship music's different. So they may even have some skill or ability, but it just takes them some time to learn how to play worship music. Or how to sing worship music. And
I think the worship team could have its own leadership pipeline sort of system, I mean, even understudy kind of thing, where people be able to hone their skills and improve. And I think it's a great way to go.
Yeah, we've gotten sidetracked on
separate podcast ministry. Topic. We'll, you guys remind us, comment below. Hey, don't forget to do that one about leaderships on a worship team. All right.
So let's move on to how to prevent most volunteer firings so you don't have to have this happen in the first place.
Yeah, there you go. And we got some great tools for this kinds of stuff too. But first of all, set clear expectations. So let's have job descriptions for all of our volunteer spaces in the church. And we have some samples for this as well in the toolkit at healthychurchestoolkit.com. But this is a key element to getting the right people, hopefully the first time. And I think this is important even for the quantity of people that will choose to engage in serving in the church, because when they have a better idea of what they're stepping into and what's expected of them, I think people are more interested in getting in. That unknown of like, what am I saying yes to is a barrier, I think. So, but this definitely helps getting the right person into the right place and not have to fire them. So the prevention of having to move people or let them go, and behavioral and spiritual expectations as well. So, as a part of our leadership pipeline design, not only do we have job descriptions, but we have character and capacity elements to volunteer positions as well, so that we know the type of person, the behavior we'd be looking for. I think these are really, really important to getting the right people in the right place the first time, or having the right information to evaluate them by if removal becomes necessary.
Totally. I think that people cannot live up to a standard that is not articulated. And there's a huge fear, I think, for a lot of churches that they don't want to set a bunch of, expectations because they're just so happy that someone is volunteering in the role. But someone is way more likely to quit or to fail in a role when the expectations are not clear, and just to be frustrated in general. Like, what are you expecting from me? How often are you going to schedule me? Are you going to schedule me every week? Are you going to schedule me once a month? Are you going to schedule me twice a month? When am I supposed to show up? You keep telling me that I'm late, but when is it that I'm supposed to be here? You have these trainings. Are those optional, or am I supposed to plan them? If I'm supposed to be there, why are you only giving me a 1 week's notice when those things are happening? You're not giving me enough notice. So people thrive when the expectations are clear, and people really get frustrated. And it can come out in toxic behaviors, actually, when the expectations are unclear. People will do what is right in their own eyes. And that's what's meant in that verse that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. That word vision isn't talking about sort of the way that we talk about vision. It's about direction. Where there is no instruction, clear instruction, people perish. And so if you're looking at your volunteer teams and going, man, people are languishing, I would wonder, how clear are your expectations around your volunteers? Because that might be a key reason why they're not thriving.
Yeah. Yep. I'm going to move into point 2 and then connect back to point 1. But the second point on this is providing feedback and coaching, regular, designed feedback and coaching.
Yes.
It's another element of leadership pipeline design. Because, well, first of all, going back to number 1, if we have certain things, we have criteria and expectations, then we need to be able to tell people, how closely are you to that? But I also want to say, back on number 1, especially in a smaller church where we really, we just barely have what we need for volunteers right now. We can set expectations above where people are, and then use this point 2 to help coach them up into a higher level.
Sure.
And that's what coaching should be for anyway. We don't want an environment in which it's always negative, like we're just constantly telling you that you're not doing well. But it's okay to want something greater out of a position, and maybe somebody is pretty good, but we're hoping that we can get them up to a higher level in any one of these areas. From something just concrete about how a job is done to their spiritual maturity and these kinds of things that we should be looking at in volunteer roles. So yeah, this regular.
I hear churches say to me all the time, we can't have elders because we don't have enough men who would be qualified to be elders. Okay, so then what are we doing about that?
Yeah.
We're just going to wring our hands and okay, so the best time to have started that was 10 years ago, and the next best time is right now. You can't microwave a leader. So, set the expectations and grow people where they are, so that maybe in 3 years you would.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised at how people will rise to the occasion and develop when you develop them. They don't develop when you don't develop them.
Yeah, this is a key area. For any of you listening that are outside the U.S., I work with a lot of international churches that are very, have a lot of turnover. I don't know what word I was trying to find there, but the congregations just turn over a lot. The expat community, military community, student community is just, people come and people go from cities. We see this in the U.S. as well, in the same situations. University towns, military towns. People come and go. The church needs to take the long view of this and have a system for building people up. Because when the Big C church takes this view, we're always equipping people for another church. But we become the recipients of that. some other church that developed people really well, they hit the ground running in a shorter on-ramp time in your environment then. And so we have to look at the global church picture in this particular element, so that we rarely would come into a situation where like we just don't have anybody that would be at the level that we need. So anyway, that's a little soapbox for me that we should all zoom out and take a big picture view of this.
Totally. The next thing is something we've already touched on, so I'll just speak to it briefly, but that's making sure that people are serving in a role that aligns with their gifting. That is a huge barrier to success for a lot of people, is they're serving somewhere where they're not gifted. So being sure that you put people through a divine design discovery process. We already mentioned we have tools for this in the Healthy Churches Toolkit that really help people understand their gifting and what roles might be good fits for them based on that gifting, as well as all the leadership pipeline training that we have in there and mobilization training. There's all kinds of stuff in there to help you with this, to make this easier for you. Because some churches look at that and go, well, that would be great, but I don't even know where to start. We give you everything you need to get started in doing that in the Healthy Churches Toolkit. So take advantage of that. But this does help prevent firings. When someone is in a spot that is aligned with their gifting, they're much less likely to have a problem. Which leads to this next piece, which is we want to create healthy on-ramps and off-ramps. This is one of those ironies of volunteer culture where we're so afraid of losing a volunteer that we don't give natural rhythms for people to roll on and roll off. But it becomes a negative self-perpetuating cycle where if people don't feel permission to roll off of teams, then it creates this barrier where people don't want to come onto teams either. Because they see, wow, if I start volunteering at this church, it's a life sentence. And so then they don't want to step up. They don't want to volunteer. And that's not good. So kind of normalize stepping down or transitioning roles as a part of the volunteer culture prevents you having to force someone from rolling off of a position.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this would freak out a lot of pastors and leaders, that there may even be a built-in rhythm in the year, kind of a recommitment time, that would feel like it makes it too easy for people to quit. That is a barrier for sure, as you said, Scott, to people starting. But, we do see this. We see sabbatical times, for pastors or elders. We also, though, Scott, see churches that have lifetime appointments to elders, and even deacons, that becomes a problem later. There's like theological debates on this. I think it would be very easy to say once you're an elder, you are always like a spiritual elder, though you don't need to be actively serving on an elder board constantly for the rest of your life. So
right,
a minor differentiation
between a ruling elder and a non-ruling elder. So one that's actively ruling, and then you could have this pool of people who don't have to be re-qualified. They only have to be, voted on to move back onto the board. So that, how great would that be? Instead of having 6 men, and it's the only 6 men for 60 years, you have this pool of 25, men who are qualified, and it's easier to form a crew of 6 every time you need. Wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't your church be healthier if you had 25 elders, qualified elders, versus only the 6? I don't really understand it. I understand the theological reasons. I also understand the needs for preserving continuity and sort of organizational knowledge. So I'm not totally criticizing, but finding some sort of a balance between those two that's really important.
You don't drop your entire board, at one time and put 6 new people on. You stagger that out.
Well, and even, I don't want to get totally sidetracked here, but I would even maybe argue against every year having a new formulation of the board. because you think just you're only meeting twice a month, maybe. Anyway, you spend the first 3 months just kind of getting the team's vibes correct. And then there's 6 months of you actually working, and then someone's going to be rolling off in a couple of months, and that changes the vibe. So there's constant upheaval every year. I mean, I could argue against that being very healthy. So just getting the right staggering rhythm correct is okay. Going back to, I think, last week's episode, this is a policy issue versus maybe a bylaw issue. Bylaws say how many people need to be on the elder board in the Constitution and how you approve people for it. But jiggering around a little bit with the terms and how long they are is a policy issue. Figure out what's best for continuity on the team and the culture of the church. But at any rate, that's a tangential issue. We've had a lot of those today. But normalize a culture of stepping down, not just from elder boards, but from any volunteer position. People go through phases, man. Like their kids are graduating from college or from high school, and they're going to college next year. So they want to scale back their commitments so that they can kind of lean into that last year with their kid at home. Like make that okay.
Yeah. All right. Finally, the point that you've all been waiting for. How to actually fire a volunteer.
It is in the title. Half an hour in, how do we actually fire a volunteer?
This has been a good discussion, though. I like these points today. But all right,
I do think that half the job is preventing the fact that it has to happen in the first place. I really do think that that's so.
Everybody would rather have an environment that they don't have to fire people than simply get good at firing people. So I think
that's right. Yeah, that's why we spent so much time here. Okay.
So the easiest way is sort of a self-selected out. That, again, going back to some of our prevention points, if the environment is one in which somebody self-recognizes, I don't think this is right for me. And as we just said, there is an off-ramp option, then that's best. So I guess,
think about
how to fire them is let them fire themselves.
Totally. But think about this. This requires some groundwork. You have to set clear expectations.
Right. Yep.
You have to create a culture where we want people serving in alignment with their gifting. And we have to have a culture where there's permission to roll off. When you do those things, then you create the environment where you can have a conversation with someone and they go, I just don't think that that's a right fit. This is a good fit for me. And I don't think that I'm thriving in this role. Like the expectations are more than I expected. I don't think I'm doing a very good job. And when you have that kind of environment where that healthy kind of conversation can happen, then a person can fire themselves and save face. It's not an embarrassing thing for them. It's just an honest conversation.
Yeah. I mean, this really was, I mean, I've kind of experienced this personally, I mean, I did some time with, 3-year-olds. I forget what age they were. But our church was designed where, it was sort of followed the school year. So on-ramped, at the beginning of the school year and at the end, I mean, that was like the completion of your term. You were not committed for the next year and forever after. And so, I mean, I tried something, I did a time in it. And at the end, I was able to say, I don't think this is I'm not the right person for this. And all of that was perfectly okay. It was just super.
No one has to be embarrassed. No one has to feel like I disappointed anybody else. That's the best possible scenario, but you have to create the culture where that can happen. And a lot of you guys listening, you don't have that culture. And so that's why you kind of leaves these other options as your only options.
Yeah. So the second way now to remove somebody, or I guess in this case more is maybe to change where they are, is the guided transition. And so sort of building off of the first one here, in which maybe they would recognize it's not a good fit. This one has a little bit of intervention and we're like, we think maybe this isn't the best fit. But again, going back to things that we've established, like we have character, identities, we have job descriptions, we use these tools that are already in place or policies in which we can say, I think we have a misalignment here. And so, I mean, just from my example, if I was completely clueless and I think seems good, or I don't mind doing this, and maybe somebody at another level of leadership is like, he looks really awkward. I'm not sure he's as comfortable as we would like somebody to be, or as excited as we want somebody to be. Then they could have pulled me in, at the end and go, I don't know. How do you think? I'm not sure if this is the right space for you. But we want to frame it as we want to help them thrive somewhere else, which we do.
Yeah,
I mean, I would hope that's your honest feeling about it, is we want everybody here to thrive in just the right spot. And so I think when we approach it from that angle, this doesn't have to be, awkward or uncomfortable.
It can be like the Peter principle is real, which is, where people tend to get promoted to the level of their incompetence. In Leadership Pipeline, we work really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. But sometimes people get promoted to a particular role or a particular ministry, and then, they don't love it, but they don't feel the permission to say, I don't like this. So sometimes coming up to them and going and just saying, are you loving this? And then they might go, I'm really not, but I didn't want to disappoint you. I didn't want to feel like I wasn't doing what I committed to doing. And that's so freeing for people sometimes. I mean, like, let's move you back to where you were, or let's move you to this different ministry.
Yeah.
That really can be helpful.
I mean, one of the classic areas that we see in the church for this is the children's Sunday school teacher that is amazing. And they're like, they're so amazing. Let's make them the children's ministry director, so that they can schedule all of the teachers. It's a totally different job. Just because you're great at being, in the ministry doesn't mean you're going to be great at leading the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's right.
All right. Our next one, the direct conversation. So we're kind of ramping these up a bit. And so we've got somebody that, maybe it even goes beyond. This is not just that they're in the wrong place, but their behavior is not where we would want it to be. How they handle people isn't good. Any number of things. But we first have got to...
Or it's not a good fit and they're not recognizing it.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
Could be
after the suggested guided transition, then we might just have to... This could be the same conversation, by the way. We could be at, the number 2 option here, the guided transition, and they're not really agreeing with your assessment that it seems like it's not a good fit. And if we know for sure it's not a good fit, now maybe we escalate to this. But we're clear, we're calm, we're specific. We have, hopefully, I don't know if it sometimes sounds like over the top to say we have documentation. If there's been some really negative behavior, we need documentation on that.
I would also go back to what we talked about in the second part, AJ, which is if there were infractions of behavior and they weren't dealt with at the time, it's totally fair for that. It doesn't necessarily change the situation because you might need to let them go from that position anyway. But they have a valid point if you go, you said nothing about this when it happened. You should. If something happens, you should address it when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And not hold it back. But you should definitely document, hey, that we have chatted over the last 6 months. Every, 4 out of the 7 times you've been scheduled, you were late. And every time we talked about that and afterwards. And you said that you were going to improve, but things have not improved. Or we've chatted every month and you were supposed to do X responsibility and you haven't been doing those things. And the ministry is too important and we have a lot of people relying on this ministry. We have to do it really effectively. And we've talked about this 4 times. Here are the times we've talked about it. You don't want them to say, well, when did that happen? You go, well, No. You need to be really specific. And it should never be a surprise. They should go, we have talked about that.
And I think the final thing on this is that you also have got to be firm in this. If a decision, and again, depending on the scenario, the person having the conversation with this person, perhaps you have already had conversations with other leaders or people that you report to, so that there is a unified decision. A decision has been made, then you have to be firm in that, and there has to be closure for it, at the end of the conversation, that they walk away knowing that something has been finalized here today, and it's not ambiguous. Because in our desire to want to preserve feelings and relationships, sometimes we lack the clarity and the decisiveness in a conversation, and people might walk away and reflect on it for a minute and go, well, is this done? Where do I stand? And you can't have that. These are the tough things that come sometimes in a leadership position.
Yeah, it actually isn't kind. Like when you're not clear. So, letting people know this isn't gonna be a fit for you. Now, it depends on the situation and the reason for it. It may be that you could say, we would like to find somewhere else where you can serve and thrive in that. So we'd love to work with you on finding a spot. And you have to run the risk. There are going to be some times where things like that happen and people will be so mad that they will leave your church or they will say bad things about you. But, okay. I mean, if you've done everything the way that you're supposed to, and you've got clear evidence of different things, and you gave opportunities and you coached up, then who cares? If someone comes up and says something, you have the truth on your side. And,
that's right.
The Lord honors that in the long term, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly right.
You can't let people, a fear that someone might say something negative about you or the church, prevent you from doing what's right for that ministry.
Yeah.
So,
we've seen some extreme cases of this, and you just have to sometimes weather those storms and keep going. The wrong move is to capitulate, to turn back on a decision and enable bad behavior to happen, or something that would be detrimental to the church, even worse in the long term. Kind of gets us into our last point here, when things escalate. And we mentioned some more extreme cases at the top of the show, but ethical breaches sometimes might require, a very decisive removal from an environment in which people have made some really poor choices. If we get into legal issues, things that actually would involve, criminal activity, then we have to bring the appropriate authorities in on this. And we've got huge years and years of issues with this in the church across denominations, and that have become very public.
Don't delay on this stuff. It's not a win.
That's right. It is not a win to try to protect people that have engaged in what would be criminal behavior. And then, but if we are talking about non-criminal but sin issues, then we sometimes have to begin some church discipline things that we, would follow the model in Matthew. Yeah,
church discipline issues would be one other where you go, okay, this person hasn't violated a law, but they've done something that they're not repenting of. And that'd be maybe a distinction I think that maybe some churches miss, is the goal of church discipline is repentance. Now, again, I'm not talking about things that are illegal. Illegal things, you got to bring in the authorities. And even if there's church discipline involved, there's also legal issues that have to be involved. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that are not illegal. The goal of church discipline is repentance. The goal is not removal. I think some people go, well, if church discipline happens, we have to remove them. That's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches
restoration.
We want restoration, and it's only if there's unrepentant sin that we remove. So even something really awful, and heinous, again, but not illegal, you don't need to remove them from the church. They would need to be removed from positions of authority, but we want them there because we want to see them restored, and we want to see them grow, and we want to see them healthy. Healing comes from repenting and confessing. That's how healing comes. Sending people out does not heal them. The point of casting people out is so that they would miss the healing power of the community and want to come back and say, I've changed and I'm sorry. I want to live differently. And then you accept them back and go, okay, great. We'd love to help you. The church discipline thing, that could be a whole nother episode, but churches just get this so wrong. Like they either don't do it, or they do it wrong, or they do it too harshly, or not enough, or not harshly enough. It's a mess. So, but that's the extreme case. If there are 10 people in your church who need to be fired, half of them, if we're just given permission, would move themselves. 4 of them would maybe require more of a conversation, and 1 person you might have to deal with pretty harshly. But I think, to kind of sum this up from my perspective, I would say most volunteer firings don't have to happen at all and can be prevented by having a healthy volunteer culture. Unfortunately, a lot of your churches don't have a healthy volunteer culture. Therefore, you have a lot of volunteers who actually need to be fired. So you maybe need to deal with the issues that you have at hand and then work on developing a healthier culture to prevent those issues moving forward.
Yeah. Yep. What's the saying, Scott? An ounce of prevention is worth what? Something.
Pound of cure.
Pound of cure. Okay. Yep. All right. If you're outside the U.S., a gram of prevention is worth a kilo of cure.
Yeah. a milligram of prevention is worth a gram. A kilogram of cure.
All right. Well, this is a long episode because it's really important. And Scott, we had a lot to say about this because we do care about it.
We also had a lot of side tangents there, but it's okay.
brought up a lot of things we had to get off our chest with some situations that we've seen. But we're glad you stuck with us to the very end. Hope this is helpful. Get in the Healthy Churches Toolkit, because we do have, as we mentioned, a lot of resources on the prevention side for developing healthy systems in your church, for engaging volunteers and making sure that they continue to be great and to improve. So go to healthychurchestoolkit.com, sign up for a 7-day free trial, and grab whatever you need out of there to help your church. That's what we built it for. So thanks for being with us, everybody. If you have any thoughts on this, love to hear your horror stories in the comments that you've had to deal with, or the super awesome wins that you had whenever you handled things and things got better. Those are even the better ones we would love to read about. So thanks for being with us. We'll see you again next week.